Mhm.
Perfectionism is not anyone's problem. It's not the thing that makes you unhealthy. It's how you respond to your perfectionism that determines whether it's adaptive or maladaptive.
We've pathologized perfectionism as a trait in our
Yeah.
culture, to the point where we don't even realize there is perhaps an adaptive lens on perfectionism.
And as I say in the book, balance is not real. It's just an idea. Nobody is operating at this like perfect harmony existence. Maybe if you're lucky, you experience glimpses of it, flashes of it, but balance for the most part is elusive. It is an ideal in and of itself.
This is episode 285 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. My guest today is Katherine Morgan Schafler, and we are talking about perfectionism. So a few months ago, I was reading Seth Godin's morning email. And if you don't know Seth, you're missing out. Seth is someone whose recommendations I would just trust implicitly on just about anything. And he referenced Katherine's book, and the title jumped off the page and right into my heart. I immediately ordered the book, as we do, and I dug into it on a flight that I happened to have scheduled for the next week. So I was just delighted that, I had it. I had something great to look forward to read on this particular plane trip. And I was about 3 pages into this book, and I texted my husband and I was like, oh my goodness, this book that I am reading it's everything. It is such an exceptional read. And I'm telling you, I was a few pages in. Um, as I continued to sort of rapidly read and highlight and reference elements of this book, I realized that I was challenging really long held beliefs that I had about myself and about perfectionism. And it gave me this fresh perspective that honestly I didn't know I needed. And it gave me a way to reframe perfectionism. So I have known for a long time that my desire to close the gap between what is and what could be is a core part of who I am. I have always labeled that divine discontent. There is this sense, it is such an innate part of who I am to notice that gap and to have a desire to close that gap. And that there's a restlessness or a discontent that can come from it that I have long tried to make peace with. And Katherine's words gave me new language for that deep yearning. And moreover, they're giving me a way to transform it into a powerful force without some of the side effects that it sometimes carries. And I am so delighted to have her on the show today. Let me tell you a little bit about Katherine. Katherine Morgan Schafler is a seasoned therapist. She has worked for years with people who can present really well, seem completely put together when they want to be, and whose problems are not immediately apparent to others. More specifically, she says she works with ambitious, perfectionistic New York City women whose lives seem to be going pretty well on the outside, but privately they're hurting. And sometimes the source of that hurt is clearly known. Other times it's waiting to be discovered. And either way, something needs to be addressed in order to thrive. And she digs in to do that work with her clients. Katherine earned a bachelor's degree in psychology at UC Berkeley and then went on to get 2 masters from Columbia University. One is focused on clinical assessment, the other on psychological counseling. She's done postgraduate training and certification at the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy in New York City. And her research interests focus on cultural norming, empathic accuracy, and mind-body connections. And she lives in New York with her husband and daughter, and they were heading off on spring break shortly after we wrapped our interview. So I am going to, without further ado, introduce you to Katherine, invite you to settle in and learn some things about perfectionism, the various types that it shows up under, and maybe a way to reconceptualize this from pathology to more of personality. And we're making sure near the end of this episode that you are able to find your way to Katherine's book, as well as to a quiz that she has where you can identify yourself as one of the 5 types of perfectionists. Here we go, my interview with Katherine.
Well, Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I love it when we have an author whose book is really popping, because my goal is always like, let's have a conversation that you haven't had in every other interview that you've done. So we'll see how well that goes for today.
Okay, that sounds great.
To get us started, tell us what's on your calendar today. What are you up to besides this interview?
Well, I had a teachers conference right before this for my daughter who's in pre-K. And then after this, I am doing 4 more podcasts. And then spring break starts for her. So I'm going to go pick her up at school early and pack and do a play date and dinner and leave tomorrow for Florida.
Yay, for the week.
Yes.
And you live and work in New York, so Florida will be a lovely change of scenery and temperature and pace.
Yes. Yeah. It snowed at the beginning of this week. It was like wet, slushy snow here. So
yeah,
as you can see, I'm eternally cold. I'm always cold.
Yeah, I'm sitting here with tea because it's wintry here today as well.
Yeah. Where are you?
Cincinnati.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So I also love to ask this question. What's taking up headspace?
I think what's taking up headspace is shifting to a more public facing role in my work, right? So I'm a behind the scenes person. I describe this by saying I'm not a birthday person. I don't, love being in the center of things. I like listening and, kind of, like I said, being behind the scenes. And so on social media and talking about this book and all of that, it's really challenging that narrative in a good way of, okay, maybe that's not what you're used to, but that doesn't mean you automatically don't enjoy it or aren't good at it. And so I've really just been trying to put elasticity around that. I like being behind the scenes more is like a narrative I play in my head. And I'm like, wait, before I decide that, what does this feel like? Do I even know? I've never been not behind the scenes. So maybe I actually like it. And I think it creates a lot of, you have to use a lot of energy to challenge the thoughts you think about yourself, even when they're positive or negative. It doesn't matter. Just like imagining yourself in a different way than you reflexively think of yourself, for me, takes a lot of headspace.
Yes, that's a great answer. And I love, it seems so clear that would happen as you step into a more public role. It's an identity challenge. It's, am I good at this? Am I not good at this? Certainly opening yourself up to a lot of opinions, positive and negative, that people might have about your work. So that visibility feels like it could certainly eat up a lot of headspace, particularly for a perfectionist.
Yeah. The other part of that is, I think, particularly for women, a lot of being on TV or podcasts or whatever is like, how much should I invest in the way that I look? Because I can really pull it together when I need to. And I like doing that sometimes. Sometimes I'm in the mood for that, and pull it together, meaning look a way that I feel is most palatable for everybody. Mm-hmm. But I also like not doing that sometimes when I don't feel like it. And it's been very interesting to see the reactions in myself and others when I, travel on any part of that spectrum.
Do and don't. Yes. Interesting. Yeah. That is fascinating. We could probably have a whole podcast about just that. You wrote a whole book on perfectionism, and there was a passage near the very beginning that I'm going to read. It's short, that just really stopped me in my tracks. I think it's the whole reason that we're here today. You said, perfectionists are intelligent people who understand that everything can't work out perfectly all the time. What they sometimes have trouble with is understanding why they still feel so disappointed by imperfection in the face of that intellectual concession. Mm-hmm. I mean, dang. That is, nothing has been more descriptive of my own experience, maybe ever, than that sentence.
Yeah.
And the women who I've shared this book with and asked to read it have all said the same thing. So tell me how you got that insight and how does it relate to the work that you have been doing up until now?
So I think the shortest way to answer that question is that disappointment is, I think, our go-to place as perfectionists to say, how do I get rid of this? And the absence of disappointment in our minds means that we have conquered something, right? It means we're kind of winning. And I realized in working with perfectionists, which, just to take a step back for anyone who hasn't read the book, this is flipping the paradigm on perfectionism and bringing out something that I noticed in my work, which is that there are a ton of healthy perfectionists, and you can still be healthy and be a perfectionist. And I saw that the healthy perfectionists that I worked with still encountered disappointment. They just knew what to do with it. And they knew how to make space for it and integrate it into the bigger experience they were having so that it didn't eclipse their whole landscape. Whereas I think when you're in a less healthy space, you experience something like disappointment or resentment or anger or sadness, whatever quote unquote negative feeling you might be encountering. And you experience that as some kind of failing. And all this is kind of unconscious, right? So you're not like, oh, I'm experiencing my internal landscape as a failure.
Right.
And so that got me thinking, like, what makes people feel that they are in a healthy space or feel like they're not doing enough? Because that's a central theme of perfectionism.
Absolutely. The word enough in all of its forms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting to me, that notion of, we're also familiar with Brene Brown's work on shame. And it does feel like that's the tripwire to shame is, for a perfectionist, that gap, which it gets internalized as failure or somehow not having been able to get there and close this gap, which is unclosable, gets internalized as I should be able to, therefore onslaught of shame.
Right. And that's negative perfectionism in and of itself. And I love the way Dr. Brene Brown phrases it of, guilt says, I feel sorry about what I did. And shame says, I feel sorry about who I am. And so, being able to put language to a lot of this stuff helps. It helped me. It helped me help my clients. And that feeling of, I still feel disappointed. So what's going on is what I call emotional perfectionism, which is when you attach an emotional experience to some kind of concept. Like, well, being healed and healthy means that I don't ever lose it sometimes, or I don't ever feel disappointed, or I'm never, impulsively say the wrong thing. And we have all of these connections in our minds without even realizing we're operating with them. Yes. And the standard for emotional perfectionism, which is so nuanced and probably the most like shocking revelation I had when doing this work and writing this book, is that the standard is not, I want to be happy all the time. I don't really think people want that or think about it. It's that I want to be able to move through challenges in a resilient way. And I want to always sort of be understanding or hold perspective. It's not so much about happiness. And so, being able to say that's emotional perfectionism. And this is how to use emotional perfectionism in a healthy way. And this is what it looks like when it's not healthy. Just offers so much more agency, so much more personal empowerment in knowing what's going on.
Yes. And the whole premise of the book, which we should get into here, is this difference between adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism. And so the notion that we've pathologized perfectionism as a trait in our culture, to the point where we don't even realize there is perhaps an adaptive lens on perfectionism. So can you unpack that kind of at a high level for the people listening so that we can get into some of these perfectionist types with context?
Yes. So something that really drove me nuts was all the books about perfectionism in the self-help personal development space basically say, here's how to be less of a perfectionist, or here's how to not be a perfectionist. And that's really problematic because perfectionism and being a perfectionist is something, and research backs this up, that people experience as a core identity. It's kind of like thinking of yourself as a romantic or an activist or an artist. You know, we don't talk about perfectionism episodically in the way we talk about something like depression, for example, which we might say, oh, I went through a depression after college or after my divorce. We don't say, oh, I went through a perfectionism. We say, I am a perfectionist.
Right.
And research backs up the notion that people who identify with themselves as perfectionists tend to identify with that throughout their lifetime. It's an enduring identity marker. So when you talk about it in commercial wellness as this bad thing, you can't talk about perfectionism as being negative without talking about the perfectionist being bad and in need of being fixed.
Right.
And just like I would never say to an activist, listen, it's great that you care, but just dial back the caring a little bit. Or I would never say to a romantic, amazing that you believe in love. I'm going to need you to believe in love 25% less of the time. That doesn't work. And what I would say to a romantic who's maybe having challenges around the romanticism and the way that's playing out in their life is, I love that you're a romantic. This is amazing. Let it feel good. You believe in love. Like, you give love the benefit of the doubt. You love connection. You love all this stuff. We don't have to change a thing about who you are. You do need boundaries around your romanticism, or it's going to hurt you. And all this stuff like love, you know, which is a power, has a dichotomous nature. Love can be healing and therapeutic and unconditional. It can also be toxic and abusive, you know. So thinking about anything that is a power, and I believe perfectionism is a power, and saying it's all good or it's all bad is a myopic, reductionist way to look at something. It's not useful, in my opinion.
Oh, so good. And I love that you say you identify as a perfectionist. This is like, obviously sort of takes one to know one, was what I kept thinking as I was reading these great stories and deep insights in your book, is particularly the story, can I just say, about Christmas with your brother or brother-in-law, and he's taken the cinnamon stick out of the drink. I was like, I just need to frame the story and put it in front of my family. They will get me so much better. So if you haven't read the book, that's a great teaser for you to go dig into the incredible storytelling that you leverage to teach really complex concepts in this book. They could be, right? People could be like, ugh, whole book about perfectionism, but it is just full of delicious little vignettes and stories that really bring to life the principles that you're teaching. So I love this. And I love that you can relate. How has perfectionism served you? Like, what does the positive adaptive side of this look like? Maybe by an example of your own life.
Yeah, well, so I think of what I want to achieve. And I have a quiz attached to the book, so you can find out which of the 5 types of perfectionists you are. And I skew towards the Parisian type, which has an ideal that they're striving towards about connection. Like, I want to be liked. I want to like others. I want people to feel safe around me. I want everyone to kind of feel at peace. Those are the things that stir my perfectionism. And it gets stirred in negative ways sometimes when I'm not on it. And in the most positive light, I think of perfectionism as spending your lifetime in pursuit of something that you can never achieve, but that is worthy of a lifetime of striving, you know. And in looking at the history of perfectionism in psychological literature, it first appears in this really positive way in the early 20th century by a therapist named Dr. Alfred Adler. And he conceptualizes it in the same way that I do, which is an innate human impulse. You know, we see the reality in front of us and we see some kind of ideal, and we know that things can be improved. And perfectionists are people who notice that gap more often than not, and who also feel an active compulsion to try to bridge the gap themselves. And to me, I see that as a contributory striving.
Yes.
As wanting to contribute to a greater society, to community care, to, improvement. And the example that I use is like world hunger. If we eradicated 99% of world hunger, that would be incredible. Perfectionists would still work to bridge that last 1%. They would still work as hard to do that as they worked before they had achieved anything. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Perfectionism is not anyone's problem. It's not the thing that makes you unhealthy. It's how you respond to your perfectionism that determines whether it's adaptive or maladaptive.
And when you say how you respond to it, can I translate that as how you feel while you're holding that tension?
Not just how you feel, also how you act, which choices you're making, whether you're exploiting or hurting other people. There are a lot of different interplays going on.
Okay. So because I think they probably vary a bit by type, and you mentioned that you identify as a Parisian perfectionist, one of the things that I loved in this book were the 5 types of perfectionists. And I think it would be helpful for the listener to kind of get a brief overview of what they are. Because my insight, and I think this was a main point you were making, is a lot of people seem to be able to avoid the label of perfectionist if they don't fit into what you call the classic type. Right? Like those seem to be the ones that are we traditionally would kind of look at and call a perfectionist. And yet you have these other types that are equally would equally agree with that basic assertion you made at the beginning.
Right.
And it shows up differently for them. So can we go through the 5?
I would love to. Okay. So, just like perfectionism has its advantages and liabilities, so do each of these types. And I don't think anyone is like only one type. Perfectionism is, and I think all mental health is really context dependent. So that story about the holidays is like during the holidays, I get into real classic perfectionist mode. And some people can be one type of perfectionist when it comes to dating, for example, and a whole other type of perfectionist when it comes to their parenting or at work. But the 5 types are the classic. So like you said, this is the archetype that we tend to think of most when we think of a perfectionist. The pros of this type are, these are really organized, structured people who effortlessly bring in a sense of predictability to any situation that they're in. They do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it in the way they said they would do it. Highly reliable. On the con side, classic perfectionists can operate in a way that's really transactional sometimes and doesn't necessarily lend itself to a spirit of collaboration or be something that engenders connection. Because classic perfectionists, they often think, well, if I want something done well, I need to do it myself. And they like doing it themselves. It's not efficient to have all a million, cooks in the kitchen. And so that can come off as sometimes haughty to other people. And personally, classic perfectionists can sometimes feel taken for granted or taken advantage of because people see them as the person who's just going to do it and do it well. So they're like, oh, she'll plan the vacation. It's fine. Right. Yeah. She likes doing stuff like that. And it may be true that you like doing things like that. But that doesn't mean it's not work. And that doesn't mean that you don't want acknowledgement and appreciation. So then there is the procrastinator perfectionist. This perfectionist wants the conditions to be perfect before they start, which of course doesn't happen. And so on the pros side, procrastinator perfectionists are really thoughtful people. They are not impulsive, which is such an asset. They can see a situation from a 360-degree perspective, and they really understand how to prepare for many multiple contingencies, right? On the cons side, their preparative measures can spill past the point of diminishing returns, and they can be preparing so much that they don't ever actually execute on the thing that they're trying to do. And what was really interesting to me about this type was understanding that they're not just procrastinating against aversive stuff like doing taxes. No. It can be procrastinating against planning your dream trip. Oh, it's not a good time to plan this trip right now. I'll plan it when, or anything. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. The counterpart to procrastinator perfectionist is the messy perfectionist, which that's the next. I'm like 60% Parisian, 30% messy, and 10% intense, but we'll get to that. So messy perfectionists, unlike procrastinator perfectionists, are obsessed with starting things, can effortlessly push through the anxiety of a new beginning, don't even experience it as anxiety. They're excited by it. It's romantic. Everything is perfect in the beginning. It feels intoxicating. They have 1,000 ideas about how to get things done, and they're naturally enthusiastic people. So those are all the pros. On the con side, messy perfectionists do not subscribe to that adage of you can do anything, but you can't do everything. You have to pick. And messy perfectionists refuse and reject that adage and end up putting their hands in a million different pots and saying yes to so many things, but actually committing to nothing. Because committing to one thing and saying a big yes requires several no's to other things. And that feels like a loss for messy perfectionists.
Yes.
So on the con side, messy perfectionists hit that middle of a process, which has inevitable tedium. It's boring. It's not as glamorous and shiny as it is when it started. And they kind of drop out because they're spread too
finishing
thin.
would introduce imperfection. The idea of it's unfinished allows the possibility of this could be perfect still, but if I don't finish, I don't have to acknowledge. That's what it sounds like.
Exactly. And then that can really lead to a negative self-narrative of I'm not disciplined enough. I can't get my shit together. I am just, nobody takes me seriously. I'm not smart enough to finish things. That kind of thing. And then there's the intense perfectionist who is really obsessed with the end of something being perfect, which looks like just over-indexing on achieving the outcome. And the pros of being an intense perfectionist are these people have razor sharp focus. They are extremely efficient. Unlike Parisian perfectionists, they don't care about being liked. So they can be effortlessly direct, right? Which is hard when you're worried about impression management sometimes, right? On the con side, intense perfectionists who aren't managing their perfectionism can really get to their goal by neglecting their own well-being, by not treating themselves well, or by neglecting and not treating well, perhaps even exploiting the people around them. So these are maybe the team managers who it's like, great, you got your goal at the end of the quarter met, you hit it, maybe you even exceeded it, but now a third of your team is going to quit next quarter because they are miserable working with you. Right?
Sort of the taskmaster version of a perfectionist, driving everyone to some standard that's not attainable.
Right. And when intense perfectionists are managing their perfectionism well, they are driving everyone and staying focused and being direct, but in a way that realizes that ideals are meant to inspire. They're not meant to be achieved.
To be actualized. Yes.
So intense perfectionist, the public persona is like a Gordon Ramsay or Steve Jobs or Anna Wintour, right? And then lastly, there's Parisian perfectionists. And this type of perfectionism is interesting because it plays out interpersonally. So we think of perfectionists as people who want upward mobility and, are always high achieving in academic or professional contexts. But Parisian perfectionists, their ideal is ideal connection. So a Parisian perfectionist could stay in a 9-to-5 job, coast through it, and be perfectly happy with that, because what they're looking for is to be really connected to everyone they're working with, or, be everyone's best friend or whatever that may be. And the pro to this type of perfectionist is that you don't have to explain to them how powerful connection is. They just get it. They just know. They have a live wire understanding of that. They tend to be authentic in many ways. They're naturally warm. They're naturally inclusive. They'll go out of their way, for example, to engage the person standing alone at the party. But on the con side, when you want connection so much, you can sometimes take shortcuts to connection. And in doing so, engage in some toxic people pleasing. You abandon yourself. So now not only are you not connected to this other person, because people can sniff out that kind of fakeness, but you've also abandoned yourself in the process.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the general broad strokes.
I mean, y'all, and what you have to know as the person listening to this is that if that sounded deep to you, and it is, there's depth just in the model, like that scratches the surface of what Katherine digs into in this book. So if this whets your appetite and you're thinking, wow, interesting, I think I could self-type, or I could go take this quiz, which we're going to give you the link to in a little bit. I really want to encourage you to read this whole book, because what gets unpacked under each of these types is so profound that I just want to make sure you're getting all the insights and not staying at the surface level. Like, this is a place where it's worth double clicking, going deeper if you're hearing yourself in any of these 5 subtypes. One of the things, Katherine, that you talk about is tension. And I talk about tension actually a lot in this community, but often the tension between our professional ambitions and the demands of our family lives, and how that can sort of pull us in. We're trying to reconcile that tension a lot around here. You talk about another kind of tension, which is the tension in the gap between the ideal and the reality. And I think this notion of being able to appreciate enough and still want more,
right,
is what I want to dig into. So, you say in the book that can be healthy to sort of stand in the tension. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we think of tension as something that needs to be resolved and ironed out and smoothed out. Tension is actually an activator. And sexual tension is the easiest example of this, right? And so there's something about when you meet someone and they are magnetic to you, and there's like a friction that is positive there. And you don't always want the absence of tension, the absence of that feeling of like, I want to move closer to this person, but I don't know what the right rhythm is.
Yes.
And I think perfectionists live with the kind of tension that I describe in the book as like the sound a light, the humming of a light that the light makes when it's on, where it's like you get used to that hum. And I think it's okay to experience that tension when you see that something could be improved, right? And again, it gets back to the disappointment of, as if we could just take a moment to stop judging ourselves in the ways we're responding, and the kind of grittiness that sometimes accompanies our feelings, we might be able to discover, and we might not, because it might not be true for everyone, but we might be able to discover that we actually have a lot of internal space to feel all this stuff. And I think creating a little bit of spaciousness is really important in managing your perfectionism, because it doesn't go away. Your perfectionism, that impulse, that noticing, and the tension that results from the noticing, and the like, what can I do about this? What should I do about this? That you have to make decisions about, that stays with you.
Yes.
And you don't manage perfectionism by trying to get rid of that. Trying to get rid of that is like trying to get rid of the wind by whacking it with a broom. Like, it doesn't work. And it not only doesn't work, you hemorrhage so much energy trying to be a different person than you are, you know? And so if you're a perfectionist, being able to just stop and accept that and embrace it and say, it's great that I have this. This is part of what makes the world go round. Not everybody gets to feel that. You know, some people are okay with moving through life and just remaining at status quo all the time. And Eckhart Tolle, who I guess is a philosopher, spiritual teacher, lots of different headings, calls those people frequency holders and says that those people are important. We need frequency holders in our culture because if everyone tried to push the limits at once, it would be total chaos. And so there's a, you know, equilibrium happening where frequency holders need to be who they are. You don't take people who are like happy, you know, doing what they do, not needing to figure out what's next. How do I evolve? How do I change? How do I grow? They just want to do their routine, come home, watch TV, chill, do it again the next day. You don't take those people and shoulder shake them and say, no, you must be obsessed with being better and improving.
Katherine, I think some of us are married to them. We were talking, some of us were talking about
the frequency holders or the perfect.
Yeah. No, well, I think so. I work with a lot of perfectionists professionally. And I think a lot of us, this gave us language for some of that relationship tension around, we have been shaking their shoulders saying, come on, how can you, and that piece of the book where you explained what is a frequency holder, I think the impact that it could have on relationships between perfectionists and frequency holders is enormous, and both sides, right? To be able to have an awareness and understanding of this tension that perfectionists are holding all the time, and the absence of it is just, that was like a mind blowing.
It's wild.
I was screenshotting and sending to my husband from an airplane, like that piece of the book. When we got there, he was relieved to know there was a name for it.
Well, both people find the other one as like unhealthy in a way. Like people often say to perfectionists, why can't you just have fun? Why can't you just relax? Why do you always have to be doing the next thing? Why do you always have to be operating over capacity, which perfectionists will reliably do? And as I say in the book, balance is not real. It's just an idea. Nobody is operating at this like perfect harmony existence. Maybe if you're lucky, you experience glimpses of it, flashes of it, but balance for the most part is elusive. It is an ideal in and of itself. So we're either always operating under capacity or over capacity. And frequency holders are much more comfortable and happy operating under capacity. And perfectionists like being over capacity. Being underwhelmed for a perfectionist is a deeply uncomfortable feeling. It's like you
not
don't
enough
want
juice.
They have too much energy and need too much sort of stimulation to be able to relax doing nothing. And so, you know, there's this idea in commercial wellness that if you're really at peace and if you're really healthy, you should just be able to sit and drink tea for hours. And I don't subscribe to that. You know, there are lots of different ways to relax and restore, and they don't all look like doing nothing.
Yeah. Oh, amen. This is why we're in love with you and your work. The validation and putting language around a lot of these feelings has been so powerful. And that's a good transition to the word powerful, because the premise that you set forth is really about power versus control and this shift. And I want to read one more passage. Do you hate it when people read to you from your work?
No, I love it.
I'm going to read one more passage that will introduce this concept. And then I want to get into it. So you say control encourages restriction. Power encourages freedom. Control is petty. Power is generous. Control micromanages. Power inspires. Control manipulates. Power influences. Control is myopic. You have to plan everything one precise move at a time. Power is visionary. It affords you the great luxury of taking leaps of faith. Power is the upgrade. Oh, and then you get into this whole thing about Beyonce, which was so perfectly embodying this concept. So what does the shift look like when we make the shift from wanting to be in control to power? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it looks like understanding first that they're two different things and that we all ping pong back and forth, right? Like The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control is the title of the book because and the subtitle, which my editor, Nikki Papadopoulos, came up with, which is so brilliant, is A Path to Peace and Power. Because it's like control is this cardboard cutout version of power. And we don't actually want control. We want power. And power is internally sourced. Whereas control is about trying to externally manipulate the outcome because you think that the outcome is going to achieve some kind of internal feeling. Mm-hmm. And that's not how it works. And, one way to delineate between the two is you control when you're in a fear mindset. And when you're present and in touch with yourself and embodied, and that doesn't mean happy or at peace, but it means you are, again, presence is a whole other topic that I explain and get into in the book. When we're afraid, we double down on control because we feel like it's the responsible thing to do. Not because we're trying to be uptight or rigid or manipulative. We don't even realize we're doing it sometimes. No. And I talk about Beyonce because I think she is a great example of someone who is in touch with their power. So I define power as understanding the immutability of your worth, meaning your worth as a human being, what you are worthy of, what you deserve, is by birthright, unconditional love, freedom, dignity, joy, and connection. All people deserve all those things simply because they are human beings. You don't earn them. You don't earn more dignity because you learn to talk. You don't earn more love because you learn to make people laugh. Those are very different than respect, just different than dignity, which respect is earned. Certain things are earned, but those 5 things are not earned. They are birthrights. And powerful people know that. And when you know that, you're less afraid of what's going to happen or not happen, or whether you win or lose, because it's not a commentary on who you are and what you're worthy of and what you deserve. And so Beyonce, we experience her as powerful, not because she executes on things perfectly, even though she does. We experience her as powerful because, a lot of people can sing, a lot of people can dance, a lot of people are beautiful. We don't appreciate those things about Beyonce as much as we appreciate that she is a master of presence. So she can walk onto stage in a bedsheet and just look you in the eye. And we would all be like, oh, mesmerized, because what we are drawn to is her power. And where her power comes from is her state of presence.
It's just mind altering to think about power being the upgrade to control, and how much of many of our lives we have spent chasing control, false sense of control, temporary sense of control, and that there's this other path. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between those two words since reading the book, and completely agree with your premise. I think that shift is one that takes thought and effort and work and support and guidance and practice, to figure out what does that even look like, because there are a lot of habits that would have to be laid down and shifted and changed to make the shift. I unequivocally think it's worth it. I think a lot of us are going to spend a long time working on that,
And that's okay, as it should be. We're human beings. I yesterday got this email from my daughter's school, and it was her report card. And she's in pre-K. Yeah. So first of all, I was like, what is this going to be? But it's about a lot of stuff that I am scared about with her because she's an only child. She was like alone in the pandemic when she was 2, the pandemic hit. So she went 8 months without seeing another kid. And I worry sometimes that like, did that mess up her social development right when she was like ready to, figure out all these important developmental milestones that I'm aware of as someone who's into psychology. And so I had this moment of like, oh God, if I open this and it's not good, then I'm not going to be okay. I'm not actually thinking this in my head, but my body's letting me know.
Yes.
Because I'm feeling some kind of disease. And I had to use that reaction that I had as just, wait a minute, let me like take a step above this and say, no matter what happens on this pre-K report card, she's still worthy of all the things. I'm still worthy. Everything's okay. Everyone's good. We're in a state of power.
One person's
state
opinion,
of connection.
right?
One person's opinion, like, but it, when we, particularly around evaluations, perfectionists are immediately like, not abandoning themselves entirely. And that's not what I did yesterday, but it was a like stepping beside myself and being like, oh, let me see if this is going to be good or bad so that I can determine if I'm going to be in a good or bad space. We get reactive, and control is like a reactive thing, whereas power is proactive. Power is, you're not untouchable when you're powerful, but again, you're just not over identifying with one thing.
Yes. Incredible. I could talk to you all day and would, but we need to wrap this up and get our listeners on their way. And I want them to know 2 things: the best place to find the book and also to take the quiz, which you mentioned earlier, where they can identify as perhaps as one of the 5 types. Do people ever find out that they're not any of the 5 types?
Sometimes, the quiz isn't designed to say like, you're not any of these, but sometimes people get like an equal measure in all of them. Sometimes people don't relate to being a perfectionist, which is totally fine.
Okay.
So you can find the book and the quiz at perfectionistsguide.com. And the book is The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control, A Path to Peace and Power. And my name is Katherine Morgan Schafler. And you can find me, I'm mostly on Instagram at Katherine Morgan Schafler.
Excellent. And we will link all of those things for spelling and syntax so that they can find them in the show notes. That will be the best way for you all to just click straight through. So if you're listening on anything, scroll down to the show notes and those links will be right there and clickable for you. Katherine, thank you for spending time with us today and for sharing and for writing this book. You're going to change a lot of lives.
Thanks for your thoughtful questions. They were so engaging. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sticking with us to the end of this extraordinary conversation. I think you can tell how enamored I am with Katherine's work and her words. She was as delightful in this interview as I found her to be as I was reading her words. And that's always fun as an interviewer, when you're like, I've kind of constructed a personality for this person based on their writing. And then to get to be face to face and have this conversation with her with the space and time that it deserved was just such a delight. I hope you will go find her book and check out her work online, take the quiz, see what type of perfectionist you are, and then hit me up on Instagram and let me know what you found out about yourself through this interview or through her work. I am at cskolnicki on Instagram. That's the best way to probably reach me these days. And I'll look forward to hearing from you as you dig into the whole idea behind releasing control and converting it to power. That's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.